This video is a record of 3 early spring sessions at the Joy Lane end of Seasalter. We are at the eastern end of the venue, adjacent to Whitstable's West Beach. I've come here to target flatfish, with flounders being the most likely, although there is the odd chance of catching a place. Dabs can show in the winter, but it's probably too late for those. I've got my familiar setup, and my bait of choice is lugworm dug at south end. The broken bits in a small bucket are my preferred choice, but I have got larger ones in the other bucket. Should you arrive at low tide, you can dig your own lug at Seasalter. It's a shallow venue, and there's no real need for grip leads. I like these Americanos. I brought a large selection of rigs, should place be a possibility. These are 2 hook flappers with beads. Since you're fishing over mud flats and a few gravel patches, you only really need continental style leads. My reels have 20-pound braid, and here's a range of other place rigs. Although I'm more likely to stick to using 3 hook clip down rigs without any beads, and Sheppey rigs. Here I've attached the Tucana Americano lead to a long snood Sheppey rig. This has got size 3 Nordic bend hooks, which are ideal for the small or broken lugworm. Just to add a little bit of variety, I've brought some razor fish for tipping purposes. My second rod is set up with a 3 hook short snood clip down rig. This has got size 2 hooks, and it's for using the larger lugworm. Looking at the rig, you can see I'm starting with pyramid lead on this one, but I'm more than likely to change over to flat lead, unless the tidal pull is stronger than I think it's going to be. The Sheppey rig will be used for searching the ground more, while the clip down rig is for distance work. As I'm casting my Sheppey rig out, I'll deal with the locational details. The map gives a regional setting first, then zooms in on this part of the North Kent coast. Seasalter is south of the Isle of Sheppey, which has a number of well-known marks. Seasalter merges with Whitstable, which is to the east. I've identified some of the nearby marks in relation to Joy Lane. Joy Lane runs alongside the railway line, and access to the beaches is via 2 bridges. I've started at the mark which is referred to as the batteries, and here you have to cross the railway line using Sharon's Alley. There's parking along Joy Lane near the Rose in Hand pub. My second mark is Admiralty Walk, and there's parking either side of the bridge. With the Sheppey rig out, I'm now casting my clip down rig some distance away from it to my left. As you can see, I've arrived a bit late and the tide is quite well in. It is a good idea to look over the venue at low tide to see where the gravity bits end and the mud begins. That gives you a better idea of what type of ground you're casting over and where the holding areas or feeding areas might be. I always keep my rods fairly low down when fishing for flatfish, unless there are large waves or a fair amount of weed in the water. Conditions seem ideal, with the water being flat calm. It's overcast and fairly warm. There's virtually no tidal pull and my tips are remaining motionless. It's the end of March and there still doesn't appear to be any crab activity. The baits are coming back untouched. I've been dragging the rigs, but that doesn't seem to produce any response, and I've been casting the Sheppey rig at various distances. It's warm enough for there to be swimmers in the water a little bit to my left, but they're not causing any disturbance. It's right at the top of the tide now, and I've not had any indications apart from two very tiny little knocks. However, I have seen a big fish jump towards the end of the groin to my right, and I have cast the Sheppey rig in that direction. I've put a small watch lead on that Sheppey rig, and I've moved the Americana onto the clip down rig. Two little knocks I had were on the clip down rig, but I have been changing my baits over on both rigs to make sure it's going out fresh. It's a bit frustrating because I know there's some fish around. I've seen a couple of more top further to my right. I'm now thinking that I should have set up a bit closer to the access point at Sharon's Alley, since that's where the fish seem to be topping. They won't be flatfish though, and it's probably too late to make that move. To cut a long story short, I finished this session on a blank. Having seen those fish topping, I did fish the tide right down, but there was no action. Nevertheless, knowing that there were fish about, I was keen to come back and give it another try. So, just over a week later I was back. This time I arrived when the tide was still out, and chose my spot, which was a bit further away from where I was the previous time. I set up the same gear and had the same bait, but this time there was a bit of an onshore breeze. This time I didn't bother with a razor fish and used a flat lead rather than a pyramid lead on the clip down rig. Although the sun was out, the temperature had dropped considerably and there was a little bit more weed around than before. I'd swapped the Sheppey rig over to a long snood clip down rig with clear mono and size 4 hooks, so both rods were now fished at distance. And it didn't take long to get a bite on that new rig, and this feels quite reasonable. Well, it's not a flatfish, but that's a good way to avoid a blank. A nice looking bass. Although that bass was caught at distance, another fish tucked quite close in as I was waiting for the bite, so my next cast was shorter, so no need to clip down. It's right at the top of the tide, and I've still only had that one bite. Once again, twitching the bait hasn't worked, but it's still worth trying. Half an hour down and I get a little knock. I drag it. Drag it once more and then feel something take. But then it lets go. The tip then knocks again, and this time I strike and feel something on. So that's target achieved, a nice little flounder. Now that the tide's receding, I'm picking up a bit more weed. It's more of an annoyance rather than hampering fishing. I have to keep removing it from my top ring and taking away any bits which get stuck on a leader knot. Any weed that you wind in onto the spool of your reel could cause problems with casting. A large proportion of crack-offs occur because of this. The rings on the splice tips or push-in tips of continental rods are pretty small, so you don't want large leader knots, or worse still, weed stuck on your leader knot, or any other part of your line for that matter, because it will impede the flow of line from your top ring when you're casting, and the momentary jolt that this creates can either cause your line to wrap around a ring or to snap. So I'm constantly looking out for small bits of weed on the line and plucking it off so it doesn't get stuck there. You may have noticed that I'm allowing the lower snood of this clip down rig to drop down, so in effect it's a 2 up 1 down rig. This is made possible by having movable stop knots rather than using crimps. That makes these types of rigs more versatile, and rather than using flapper rigs you can still clip them down if you want to cast some distance. And this particular rig, with a yellow body line and size 2 Aberdeens on 17-pound snoods, has been getting most of my fish recently, and although it's designed for place, it is my go-to rig for anywhere that I go. fish had tied right down, and although it was very slow, I did get one more bite right at the very death and caught another flounder, but unfortunately I'd already packed my cameras away, so not a particularly memorable session, but quite satisfying when you catch your target fish, particularly when everywhere's fishing very hard. Just over a week later, I fancied giving Joy Lane another go, but this time from the Admiralty Walk section. I drove over the bridge and fortunately found a parking spot in Admiralty Walk itself. That means I didn't have to go very far to where I'm fishing. My hopes were quite high since conditions looked quite good again for flatfish, and you can only hope that they've arrived in a few more numbers. Once again, there's very little tidal pull and I'm using the same gear as I did before with the same rigs. Bait-wise, I've got large lugworm for one rig and the smaller or broken lugworm for the rig with the size 4 Aberdeen hooks. I've also brought a few leftover ragworm from a previous session. On this occasion, I decided to pack my beach ledger rod as well, just in case I decide to fish closer in, but I'm not setting that up at this stage. So the two rods I'm using in the earlier part of the tide have clipped down rigs for distance work. With the weather quite nice and being a Sunday, there's a few more people using the beach. There's a few canoeists, paddle boarders and jet skis, as you can see behind me. There's also quite a few swimmers about. I am the only one fishing and I'm a little bit concerned that one of two of them might actually cross my lines. The jet ski didn't affect my fishing, but one of the paddle boarders went over my lines and so did one of the swimmers. No action so far, but since the tide has come a fair way in, I have stopped and set up my third rod. That's quite fortunate since the big fish jumped close in, so I decided to pull in one of my rods and have a go for whatever it was that jumped out. This is now the third occasion that this has happened. This time the fish leapt clear of the water, and I don't know, it might be my imagination, but I've got a feeling it might have been a sea trout. So if there's anyone watching this video that fishes this area and knows about sea trout being present, do let me know. Do let me know how to go about trying to catch one. My Arcadia rod has a long snood sheppy rig, which is obviously not designed for sea trout, but it should pick up bass or flounders should they happen to be close in. so a gentle lob to the end of the groin where I saw that fish jump. First bite, a good knock at distance, which I strike and connect with. And it's a lively little schoolie. No indications on a rodfish close in. Schoolie took ragworm, so it's worth putting that back on again. Fresh, larger lugworm goes onto the bottom hook. The bait on a close-in rod has been untouched, so it can go straight back out again. High tide's come and gone. I've only had one other little knock at distance. No indications at all on the inside. So I'm going to dispense with that rod and have both rods fishing at distance. I get a little knock, which I was in two minds whether to strike or not, so I was a bit hesitant, but I did, unfortunately. I feel something on. And it's a lovely flounder, which has taken ragworm on a middle snood. A little bit later, with the tide further down, I strike into another knock. Flounder on top snood, and I had to look at it quite closely, thinking it might have been a place. But despite the orange spots, it had no nodules on its head, and its lateral line was quite rough. Still, I'm not disappointed, and I'll just have to come back to Seasalter to try and catch a place which I know are present here, and I might also think about bringing my spinning gear to try and catch whatever was jumping close in.